My name is Evelyn Carter, and I was 72, the morning my son told me I was too old to travel. I can still see the sunlight slanting across the chipped counter as Mark and his wife Samantha moved quickly around the kitchen, their suitcases waiting by the door. "Mom, just water the plants and double-lock the doors," Mark said, handing me a list like I was a neighbor doing them a favor. Samantha added without looking at me, "You'd be miserable on a long flight anyway." I smiled faintly, so my voice wouldn't tremble. They herded the children into the van, laughter spilling out as they spoke of gelato and piazzas. I waved from the porch, though none of them looked back. When the van disappeared, the silence pressed against me harder than I could stand. I filled the kettle, reaching for the comfort of tea. That was when I opened the mailbox and saw the envelope with the travel agency's logo. Inside were 4 tickets: Rome, 2 adults, 2 children. My name was nowhere. I set them on the table, my hands trembling. They hadn't even bothered to carry the tickets themselves. I was meant to sit home and guard the house. The kettle shrieked, but I didn't pour. Instead, I dialed the agency. My voice was steady as I gave the numbers printed across the tickets. The girl asked for a reason. I said none. When she confirmed the cancellation, I wrote the code carefully, then opened my laptop. 1 seat aisle Rome. Purchased. For the first time in decades, I wasn't waiting for anyone to offer me a place. I was taking one for myself. The morning of their flight, the house was alive with noise. Mark rushed the kids through breakfast. Samantha checked her phone, and I stood at the sink, rinsing a cup no one would use. They barely noticed me. Emma, my granddaughter, gave me a quick hug. "We'll bring you something from Rome, Grandma," she said brightly. I kissed her hair, swallowing the ache that threatened to rise. Mark called over his shoulder, "Don't forget the alarm code." His voice sounded like instructions for a babysitter, not a daughter to her mother. When the van door slammed shut, I stepped onto the porch. The engine turned over, and in a moment, the driveway was empty. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. I went back inside, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the travel tickets I had canceled. My name, absent theirs, printed in bold. I traced the edge of the envelope. Once I had been the one planning road trips, choosing motels, packing snacks for the children. Now I was a set of keys left behind. I carried the tickets upstairs and slipped them into my purse. My suitcase, unused for years, sat in the closet under a thin layer of dust. I pulled it free, opened it wide, and began folding clothes with deliberate care. Comfortable shoes, a dress I hadn't worn since Paul's retirement party, a small notebook. Each item felt like a promise. By nightfall, my bag stood ready. I brewed 1 final pot of tea, left the mug untouched on the counter, and checked the lock twice. In the morning, they would be in Rome, believing I was here watching over the empty house. Instead, I would be thousands of miles away, reclaiming the life they had declared finished. The flight was long, but I didn't mind. Each hour that passed felt like a layer peeling away the house, the silence, the weight of being dismissed. When the wheels touched down in Rome, my heart thudded like I was 20 again. The air outside the terminal was warm, buzzing with scooters and car horns. A driver waved a cardboard sign with my name. For a second, I almost didn't recognize it, Evelyn Carter, bold and visible. He took my bag, chatting about the Colosseum as if I were just another tourist. To me, it felt like a declaration I existed. The small hotel sat on a narrow cobbled street near Piazza Navona. The receptionist, a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a bun, handed me a brass key. "Benvenuta, Signora Carter," she said with a smile. My room was modest white sheets, a window overlooking terracotta rooftops, but to me it was a palace. I walked until my legs ached, following the sound of fountains and street musicians. The scent of espresso drifted from cafes, and everywhere I turned, life spilled onto the streets. I ordered a cappuccino, sipping it slowly, while families and couples passed their voices, rising and falling like music. For the first time in years, no one asked me to stay behind to watch over what they considered more important. I was simply a woman in Rome with no duties except to breathe it in. When night fell, I stood at my window, the city lights flickering below. I whispered into the darkness, "I am still here." The words felt fragile, but true. The next morning, I wandered through Campo de Fiori, where stalls brimmed with flowers and ripe tomatoes glistening under the sun. Vendors shouted prices in Italian, their hands moving as quickly as their voices. I paused by a stand of lemons, their fragrance sharp and clean. "American," a voice asked. I turned to see an older man in a linen jacket holding a bag of fresh bread. His accent was faint, his eyes kind. "You looked like you weren't sure how to choose." I laughed softly. It's been a while since I bought lemons without a supermarket sticker. He introduced himself as Daniel, a retired professor from Boston, who spent half the year in Rome. We walked together through the stalls, and he told me how he'd come after his wife passed, intending to stay 2 weeks. 2 weeks had become years. Over coffee at a corner cafe, he asked what brought me here. I hesitated, then admitted, "My family told me I was too old to travel, so I came anyway." Daniel studied me for a moment, then smiled. "Good. Life doesn't end because someone else runs out of imagination." The words sank into me deeper than I expected. For so long, I had measured my worth by what my family needed. Sitting across from this stranger who had chosen his own freedom, I felt something shift. When we parted, he pressed the extra loaf of bread into my hands. "For your breakfast tomorrow. Don't let it go stale." As I carried it back to the hotel, the warm crust against my palms, I realized I hadn't felt this scene in years. A week later, I boarded a train north to Florence. The ride curved past hills dotted with olive groves, the sky so blue it seemed painted. When the train slowed into Santa Maria Novella station, I felt like I had stepped into another lifetime. Florence unfolded like a dream of stone and sunlight. I wandered through the Uffizi, craning my neck at Botticelli's angels, their faces calm as if they knew secrets I had forgotten. Crowds pressed close, but I moved slowly, letting each painting speak. For years I had walked hallways at home unnoticed. Here, even silence was alive. In the evening, I found a trattoria tucked off a quiet street. The waiter brought a bowl of ribollita and a glass of red wine. I ate alone, yet not lonely. The murmur of conversations, the clink of glasses, the scent of garlic and basil wrapped around me like company. When I stepped outside, the sky was streaked violet. A group of young musicians played on the steps of a church, their notes rising into the night air. I sat on the stone steps, clutching my shawl, listening until my chest ached. That night, in my small hotel room, I wrote in the notebook I had packed. For the first time, the words came easily. I am not invisible. I am a woman who crossed an ocean. I am someone who stayed when they told me to sit still. As I set the pen down, I realized the trip was no longer about defying my son's words. It was about remembering my own. From Florence, I flew west to Lisbon. The city welcomed me with tiled walls that glittered in the afternoon sun and steep streets echoing with the rattle of old trams. My hotel overlooked the Tagus River, where ships glided slowly toward the Atlantic. I spent mornings wandering the Alfama district, its alleys narrow and winding clotheslines swaying above. Children darted between doorways, their laughter carrying in the air. I stopped often not out of fatigue, but to breathe, to let the city imprint itself on me. One evening, I slipped into a small tavern where a woman sang Fado. Her voice was low, aching, filled with centuries of longing. The room grew still as she sang each note, a thread tugging at memories I thought I had tucked away. I felt tears rise not of sadness, but recognition. Loss and resilience had their own language, and here it was spoken in song. Afterward, the singer passed my table and touched my hand. "Saudade," she said softly, as if naming what I carried inside. I nodded, unable to speak. Walking back, I thought of Mark and Samantha. Perhaps they imagined me still in the kitchen, fussing over tea, waiting for updates. The irony almost made me smile. Here I was wrapped in the music of strangers, finding pieces of myself in a foreign city. That night, I stood at my balcony and watched the river turn silver under the moon. I whispered the Portuguese word back into the night, saudade, a bittersweet ache that no longer frightened me. By the time I reached Paris, autumn had settled in. The air smelled faintly of rain and roasted chestnuts, and leaves clung damply to the cobblestones. I spent hours walking along the Seine, the city's rhythm carrying me forward. One evening, returning to my hotel, I noticed a blinking light on the phone. I pressed play. Mark's voice spilled into the room, tight and annoyed. "Mom, where are you?" "The neighbors said your car hasn't moved. We tried calling. You didn't tell us anything." His words tumbled fast, clipped with irritation rather than worry. Another message followed this one from Samantha. "Evelyn, it's irresponsible to disappear like this. The kids were asking why Grandma isn't answering. You're being selfish." I sat on the edge of the bed, the Eiffel Tower glittering faintly through the window. My hand didn't tremble this time. I felt strangely calm, almost detached, as though listening to characters in a play. For years, their voices had dictated where I went, what I did, even what I dreamed. Now the distance between us was more than miles. It was choice. I didn't return the call. Instead, I pulled on my coat and walked to a cafe still buzzing with late-night chatter. I ordered onion soup and let the warmth spread through me as strangers' laughter filled the air. For once, I belonged exactly where I chose to be. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "They think I'm selfish." Maybe I am, but it feels like the first time I've truly owned myself. In the quiet of a Paris morning, I sat at the small desk in my hotel room, a blank sheet of stationery before me. The pen hovered in my hand. I thought of writing to Mark, explaining, defending, maybe even apologizing. The urge was old familiar, the reflex of a mother smoothing edges before they cut too deep. But the page stayed empty. Each word I imagined felt false. Why should I explain what it meant to breathe freely, to feel the air of another country on my skin, to rediscover my own reflection in shop windows instead of vanishing into the background of theirs? I folded the page, once crisp, and slid it back into the drawer. No letter today. Maybe never. Instead, I walked to the Luxembourg Gardens. Children pushed toy sailboats across the fountain. Couples strolled with scarves knotted against the wind, and the air smelled faintly of wet earth and roses. I sat on a green chair and watched life unfold without me needing to manage or protect it. Daniel had sent a postcard from Rome, a simple sketch of the Pantheon with 2 words, "Still here." I smiled, imagining him with his bread and books unhurried. On the way back, I stopped at a boulangerie and bought a croissant. Flakes scattered down my coat as I bit into it, warm and buttery. The taste was simple, yet it carried the weight of something profound. I didn't need to write explanations. My presence, my choice, was enough. That evening, I tore the blank page into strips and let them fall into the wastebasket like pieces of an old habit. The storm broke 2 weeks later. I was in a small inn in Bruges canals, glistening outside the window, when my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a voicemail, it was a video call. Mark's face filled the screen red with anger. "Mom, what the hell are you doing?" His voice was sharp enough to cut. "You vanished for weeks. No explanation, no contact. Do you know how irresponsible that is? We left you the house to look after, and instead you're gallivanting." The word stung, not because it was true, but because it was meant to reduce me. I answered calmly, "I'm traveling, Mark. For myself. For once." His jaw tightened. "You're 70, not 20. What if something happens to you? Do you expect us to drop everything and come rescue you?" I felt the weight of his words, but also their emptiness. They weren't about me. They were about control, about the image of a mother always available, never inconvenient. "I didn't ask for rescue," I said. "I asked for respect. And when you told me I was too old, you made it clear I wouldn't get it at home." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then the call ended abruptly. The screen went black, leaving my reflection staring back. I set the phone aside, heart steady. The confrontation hadn't shattered me. It had clarified me. Outside, the bells of a nearby church began to toll, their echoes filling the air. I listened, realizing the sound marked not loss, but release. That night, I slept without dreams, the silence of the room filled only with the rhythm of my own breathing. Venice was the last city I had promised myself. I arrived on a misty morning, the lagoon pale in endless gondolas, swaying like shadows on the water. The city seemed half dream, half ruin, and somehow both fit the woman I had become. I spent the days wandering over bridges, losing myself in alleys that twisted and doubled back. In a small glass shop on Murano, I bought a hand mirror no larger than my palm. Its frame shimmered with tiny blue flecks like captured fragments of the sea. That evening, I sat by the canal outside my hotel and studied my reflection. The face staring back was older, yes, lined, softened, marked by time, but it was also mine. Not my son's caretaker, not my daughter-in-law's house-sitter, mine. A gondolier sang softly as he passed, his voice carrying across the water. I closed my eyes and let the sound wrap around me. I thought of Paul, my late husband, and wondered what he would say if he saw me now. I imagined his quiet smile, the one he wore when I surprised him. In my notebook, I wrote, "I am not too old. I am not finished. I am becoming." As the sun dipped low, lanterns flickered to life along the canal. I tucked the mirror into my bag, knowing it would come home with me, not as a souvenir, but as proof. Proof that I had seen myself again and recognized the woman still waiting there. The city exhaled with me water, lapping gently, as if agreeing that I was not invisible. When I finally returned home, the house looked exactly as I had left it. The porch light still flickered, the garden needed trimming, and the silence pressed in the moment I opened the door. Yet something was different me. A stack of mail waited on the counter, along with another note from Samantha. This one was shorter, almost careless. "Call us when you're back. The kids missed you." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of what had been said before. I didn't feel the old urge to smooth it over. Instead, I set the note aside and unpacked slowly. I placed the Murano mirror on my dresser, the notebook beside it. They weren't trophies, they were reminders. That evening, I brewed tea and sat by the window. Across the street, neighbors chatted on their lawns, their voices carrying faintly in the air. I could have felt the same loneliness I had once drowned in, but now it held a different weight. Loneliness had become solitude, and solitude had become choice. I knew Mark and Samantha would come around, or maybe they wouldn't. Either way, I was no longer waiting for their permission to live. The trip had given me something their words could never erase, the certainty that my life was still unfolding. As the first stars appeared, I whispered the phrase I had carried through every city, every night alone, every page I had written, "I am still here." And for the first time in decades, I believed it without question. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy these family drama and revenge stories, please subscribe and join me for more every day.